So do updates really matter? I've been having this thought for a while now that the whole idea of updating your system isn't nearly as exciting as it used to be. And I wonder if this is because the tech landscape as a whole is stagnating, or whether it's just I'm getting old and curmudgeon-y, or a combination of both. I'm using this example in the background here of Zorin OS 17, well 17.1 technically, but this is a great example of an operating system that only just came out, like as in it's a few months old now, but it is based on a package base that many criticized, including myself, as being just really out of date or old already, because it was based on an OS that came out 2 years ago at this point. And it got me thinking, is it really, do updates really matter that much? And I don't just think about it in the Linux world, I think about it in the tech landscape in general. So here's just a snapshot of where my digital life is at right now, right? So I am not running the latest version of macOS. I'm not running the latest version of Windows. I'm not running the latest version of iOS. I'm not running the latest version of Linux Mint as my primary daily driver. I'm not running like the latest version of damn near anything. And I wonder if it's just because I'm getting old and lazy, or is it just that there's not that much compelling stuff going on? So in this video, I just want to kind of clear at least the air for myself, and I'll let you guys decide whether this is something that resonates with you or not. But I do want to go out there and give some solid reasons as to why we should care about updates and why we should apply them, and when we just let that sucker pass by, and not really care too much about it. I think when it comes to security, I think that is ultimately always going to be the where we need to be paying attention, because in the last year or so, there's been some catastrophic vulnerabilities that have been found, even in Linux, which was pretty strange. There's been a few in the past, but the ones that came out over the last year were pretty full on. And it was critical that those patches got issued as quickly as possible. And so kudos to, providers like Canonical and Red Hat and others who pushed out patches for the Linux kernel very, very quickly. And that's the way it should be. So I guess from a security standpoint, being able to get quick access and ready access to kernel updates, to patch vulnerabilities in core levels of software is really critical and important. But when it comes to, I guess, features, I'm not so sure. Bug fixes, yep, I'll definitely take some bug fixes for any given operating system and what it's going through. I think in the case of something like Zorin, and I know this doesn't apply to everyone, but in the case of Zorin, they've got such a line to tread when it comes to figuring out how to make all of this software work together. Because at the end of the day, they're cobbling together like a lot of different versions of things to make things work. For example, the version of the file manager here that we're dealing with, I think is older. So this is version 42 effectively. But then when we look at the version of gedit that we're running, it's version 41. And then when you look at some of the desktop components of Zorin, it's even older. And there's just a lot of stuff that has to be cobbled together here. So bug fix releases, I'm always here for that. And I think staying on top of like having a solid update manager to be able to manage bug fix releases can lead to a much more refined user experience overall. But then I guess the other critical area where I think a lot of new users, especially users in the tech YouTuber space, fall short is when it comes to hardware enablement. This is something that tripped Linux Mint up for a long, long time. They would release a version of their operating system that had a long-term support release kernel, which is great. But then their new hardware would come along in generations, Intel, AMD, now we've got ARM as well. And those would require new drivers and new support in the graphics stack and all sorts of things, which would then often lead to regressions and new users trying to hop on board with new hardware couldn't, because the operating systems that were targeting new users, I would say mostly Zorin, Ubuntu long-term support releases, and Linux Mint, and there are others, didn't always have the latest hardware enablement there. So I guess in that sense, if you've got brand new hardware, then updates do matter, and you're probably going to be running Arch or Fedora or something like that. But this is the bit that really bugs me, is when we start talking about features. Because once upon a time, I used to love a new release of the GNOME desktop or a brand new release of the Plasma desktop, because these things would have like oodles of new toys to play with, or so it seemed. And nowadays, it just kind of doesn't seem like we're in the same place that we used to be. And I don't know whether that's because there's not as much time and effort being put into developing a desktop, or whether it's more to do with the fact that the resources are going towards stabilizing these desktops as the underlying technology continues to march forward. Here's a good example, right? So Plasma 6. Plasma 6 is widely regarded as an excellent release. Like Plasma 6.1, I've seen like the amount of people that are touting it as the perfect Linux desktop is pretty amazing, to be honest. And I've played around with Plasma 6.1, and I might make a video about it depending on if you guys have the appetite for it and whether there's anything I can contribute that hasn't already been said. But a lot of the praise for Plasma 6.1 is, hallelujah, it ain't broken. And they've also fixed some stuff with Wayland, so now NVIDIA users are happy. And I'm like, really? Is that the best we got? Now, I'm inherently an optimist, and I like to try and find the good in pretty much anything. But when it comes to like where the major Linux desktops are at and the features and how keen I am for each update, it seems to have dampened in recent years. And I think this has got to do with fundamentally the desktop functionality that I get out of the GNOME desktop or out of KDE really hasn't changed much in probably the best part of 5 years. Now, the core underlying technology, so in GNOME's case, GNOME, the GTK4 series and some smooth animation type stuff, and Plasma migrating to accommodate for a new version of the Qt backend. Like that's all good stuff. And I'm glad that both of these desktops are at a fairly mature state now where they both feel polished and they feel fluid and they work well with modern hardware and they work well with Pipewire and Wayland and the rest of it. But like functionally, what's changed? Like what could we do now with our desktop that we couldn't do 5 years ago? And I guess maybe that's like Wayland might be the best example there. Well, we can do display scaling a lot better. We can manage multiple monitors better. I mean, that's good. That's good. It just doesn't affect me. Like I'm just here with my 1080p display, same as always. So maybe it is that I'm just getting old. But then it gets even worse when we look at what is coming and what is now touted as the most up-to-date software that you can get out there in the big bad world. Obviously, the situation on Windows at the moment is interesting, and most of the features that Microsoft are most excited about have to do with AI, and that's going to be a common theme across pretty much everything now. And honestly, I couldn't care less. It kind of sucks most of the time, and there's still, I think, yet to be a solid use case for like what AI is going to do. And the thing is that Microsoft and Apple, from the recent announcements at WWDC, they are really doubling down on this whole AI thing. Like when you look at recaps of what has happened at the recent WWDC, it's basically all just littering AI features all through iOS, macOS, iPadOS, watchOS. Like, I mean, RCS support. Hey, I'm here for that. Whoop-de-doo, finally. As somebody who is an Android user sometimes and an iOS user other times, I'm all about that. But apart from that, like seriously, the rest of this stuff is like all AI, all of it. And look, I get the feeling AI is more useful to investors than it is to everyday people. Then when I look at some of the other desktop environments that are out there on the Linux side of things, the Mate desktop has been on maintenance now for a little while. It is basically just receiving bug fixes at this point. And even when you look at one of my favorite projects of the last few years was Ubuntu Mate. And Ubuntu Mate is still a great desktop, but when you look at the release notes of their latest long-term support release, it's like, yup, the Mate desktop still exists. Enjoy. And that's kind of it. Where if you were to scroll back to even the 22.04 release notes, you can see there's some work, there's a bit of polish going into it here. to try and keep some of these features, I don't know, cool and interesting. Better support for NVIDIA drivers, better like bug fixes to some of the desktop layouts. The heads-up display menus were still cracking along. Like there was still some cool stuff to be found. Whereas, yeah, there's just not a whole lot going on. And then you have a look at XFCE. And XFCE, I mean, they enjoyed a big release back in December of 2022. And again, most of this was, I mean, there were some genuinely new features that were added, but again, a lot of it is kind of accommodating newer technologies that are happening kind of underneath XFCE's feet. I can see the argument that XFCE continued to make some good strides here in terms of features for a desktop. But again, sort of functionally, there's not a whole lot here that we hadn't seen before. So do updates really matter anymore? Look, I find it harder and harder to find a good case for why they do. Now, here's one caveat that I will make. Updates, I think, still really do matter in the world of apps, because the amount of work that goes into creating good quality applications, I think, should trump the amount of work that goes into building a solid desktop. Because a desktop is only ever as powerful as the apps that you can run on it. And some of my favorite apps, I mean, that a distro like Zorin OS bundles in, and even their pro version, some of these apps are so incredible with what they do. And with those new releases, I get a little bit excited every time I see those things. For example, two of the video editors that I've used for a long time, OpenShot and Kdenlive, both had significant releases over the last few months. And I really love what these projects are doing. They're bringing in some just incredible features and polish and stability and performance into their apps that I love to see. Back in the day, I used to have to wait for a new Linux distribution release to come along in order for this stuff to get packaged in that distribution. But nowadays, that's not really a problem, what with centralized package management like Flatpak, and I guess Snap and App Images and others. But yeah, what do you guys think? Are you guys excited for updates as much as I am, or are you just kind of languishing on whatever version you were last running and hoping that things don't change too much more? I swear, if I see another AI integration into stuff, I'm gonna flip some tables or something. Anyway, that's been my ranty video. I hope you got something out of it. I'll see you in the next one.